healthcare system is broken, but it doesn't have to be. This is Revenue Cycle Optimized by Infinix Healthcare. We discuss the latest challenges in the revenue cycle space and provide actionable tips on how to overcome them at your organization.
Welcome everyone to this episode. I'm your host, Stuart Newsom, and we're diving into a topic that's top of mind for many healthcare organizations today, and that's RCM outsourcing. And the title's really RCM Outsourcing Uncovered, Building Trust and Overcoming Misconceptions regarding some RCM outsourcing. So joining me are two exceptional experts in this field, and they'd be very familiar with any of y'all who have joined in the past. First of all, we have Bo Bowman, who's our VP of Strategic Accounts, who oversees Medical Practice Billing Division here at Infinix Healthcare. As many of y'all have heard him speak before and follow him, he has a vast experience as a practice administrator, physician group executive, hospital CEO, with a deep passion for enhancing the healthcare business cycle. And then we also have with us Christina Coronado, who's our Chief Operating Officer of the ERS division, a very seasoned professional who's worked extensively in the revenue cycle management space. Christine combines her strategic insights with a hands-on approach to tackle some of the biggest challenges that providers face in today's healthcare environment. So today, this particular topic, we're going to be discussing some of those common fears, misconceptions about RCM outsourcing. We'll explore how providers and a lot of stakeholders out there can gain confidence, build trust, and also maintain control while benefiting from outsourcing their revenue cycle processes. Now, let's get started. So first of all, I just want to ask, how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing great, Stuart.
Doing
Thanks
great,
for
Stuart.
thanks for the intro. Thanks for having us, and looking forward to the discussion. This is a hot one right now.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So we'll dive right into some questions. One of the biggest concerns providers have about RCM outsourcing is losing control over their operations. How do you ensure that outsourcing enhances rather than diminishes a provider's ability to maintain control?
A couple things that come to mind, and then I'll let Christine, kind of share her thoughts too. It's tough. I've been on both sides of the pendulum in this particular, situation. And, when I was an administrator, a lot of times it was a last resort. And I still think sometimes that's the mindset, because there's this feeling that, oh, we can handle that. We're professionals. We're running this medical practice. The physicians have entrusted us with their money, to be real simple about that. And so it's really the last thing, you want to mess up. And so there's just a lot of eyes on it and a lot of attention, and so it's a tough discussion you have to have with yourself, both professionally, with your team, and say, hey guys, we've gone as far as we can go on this, but we've identified some opportunities. So again, getting a little comfortable, right, with saying that we have some limitations as a medical practice administration team, and it might be time to go get some expert or some outsourcing help. And just having that first inclination and finding some peace with that, so you can kind of go forward and seek your outsourcing journey. I'd say that might be the toughest part. What do you think, Christine?
I think that people are afraid that they won't have a relationship with the outsourcing party because we're not on site, right? And we're perceived not to be down the hall. And so I think that that's scary for a lot of people. But I actually think that you can hold outsourcing a little more accountable sometimes, because even though we have that relationship, I think that we're not just employees. We're answering to the CEO, the CFO, and the administrator, and probably in a little tougher situation than maybe internal staff face.
Mm-hmm.
So
that makes a lot of sense, because you're really an extension of their staff, not just turning things over and not having that control. Ensuring that control is that accountability. Yep.
Right.
So when adopting, the outsourced RCM model, it obviously requires a certain mindset. And I think it's changing that mindset. So what steps can providers take to build confidence in this transition? I think we touched on a little bit of it with accountability, but I think that's important to help them transition to easing up the fear of losing control.
Yeah, I think that for us, we usually work off the practices instance of whatever their PM or EMR system is. And so that offers some transparency that
Mm.
I think a lot of outsourcing companies don't provide. They may have their own platform and there are no logins to that, but we basically, whatever you have, we'll work off of it. And you have total control over all of our logins, the access that you give us, that sort of thing. And so I think that's the transparency is something that's very, very important to build trust with the providers, along with communication. We definitely have to communicate, especially when maybe documentation doesn't support sometimes medical necessity, or instead of just moving on, we like to provide physician education on that.
I'd add just a couple of things, and Stuart, a little bit in the spirit of the fear factor, and then Christine, a little bit in the spirit of the system. In our case, and in Phoenix's case, having the ability, the resources, and the expertise to be agnostic to system. And so, Stuart, back on the fear, kind of factor, if you will, change. Right. We talk a lot about change management. We talk a lot about, hey, listen, nobody really likes change. RCM and billing staff in particular don't like a lot of change, right?
Right.
Because there's
Yeah, like the
there,
routines, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
well, and then there's listen, there is historical knowledge with
Yeah,
how that practice, whether it's cardiology, orthopedics, urology, specialty primary care, we see it a lot in OB-GYN. There's historical knowledge on how the practice has dealt with various payers.
Mm.
There's very difficult payers out there these days that take extra documentation, that take extra tender love and care, depending on what the situation is. And that historical knowledge does live either with the billing team, the administrator, heck, it even lives with the doctors. A lot of times, the doctors know exactly what that payer wants when they're coding their note. And so when you put those two together, kind of the fear of change and then the historical knowledge, and you think, oh heavens, how am I going to, outsource all of this to a team that's brand new to us, that's brand new to our way of doing things, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's where I'd like to offer where we can come in and in a very organized fashion talk through, if you will, kind of the implementation function, right? And I think it's
Mhm.
important to have a lot of those implementation and onboarding discussions way before
yeah,
you have decided to jump off the boat here and do the outsourcing function. And so at Infinix we do SOPs, standard operating protocols, and we study how you do things. If we can't come shadow in person, then we'll have plenty of calls to understand, okay, what do you guys do with your surgery claims? What do you do with your office claims? What are you doing with durable medical equipment? Right, we
mhm,
see a lot of challenges around there. Maybe it's a home health solutions and challenge. And so there has to be this pre-formed partnership from the beginning where, hey, things are going to change here, but we're all going to work as a team. We're going to focus on changing for the better. And hey, let's start with what's working and then let's get to, hey, what the barriers and limitations are.
yeah,
Right. Right. That makes so much sense because it's almost like they have this tribal knowledge
Absolutely.
that's
Good term.
sometimes difficult for them to share internally over the years. You have one person that maybe knows how, this particular payer behaves, another person knows how these potential problems occur, and they don't even share them internally many times.
Sure. And in a
right,
busy practice on lean resources, oftentimes it's in somebody's head.
yeah,
Mhm.
Right? It's not written down, or there's no Venn diagram or workflow diagram. And because who has time to do that, right? You got a couple of coders or a couple of billers, and it's the end of the year and we're trying to get everything out, right? And so that's another pretty good reason to look at outsourcing, because we're going to come in, we're going to workforce everything, we're going to put together a workflow protocol, and we're going to leave the place better than we found it. And that's
Mhm.
the key there.
that's great.
Right, right. And so and part of that is transparency is key.
Mhm.
Christine's mentioned that, and building that trust with providers is being very, very critical. So there's kind of a twofold question. I guess once you've gained that trust, or first, how do you gain that trust? What advice would you give providers into how to trust a partnership? What are those key factors? And then once that trust is gained, how do you supply that transparency? Whether with tools, whether with certain SOPs, what have you.
Mhm. I think it's both, but I also think that obviously nobody's perfect. And when there are challenges, it's how do you work through the challenges with the providers, and when issues happen, what is the communication? Because I think that on our end, we want to be honest and upfront with any issues that we see, and so that both of us can actually grow from any situation. I do think transparency with the system really, really helps. They
Hmm.
can go in and see what we're doing, but we're also going to have regular meetings that show where we are on their AR, on their payment posting, on their coding. We're going to have pending lists that we share weekly that show that, we actually need some more information before we can bill off this claim. And then we have major life issues that happen, like the Change Healthcare situation that really affected everybody.
Right,
I think it's sharing the difficult things
right,
with
right,
with people, because everything's not rosy all the time.
right,
I
right.
think the other piece of this too is around culture, right? It's around culture and it's around what effort is involved at the potential client, at the potential medical practice's culture, and then what is Infinix's culture? What is their mission? What are their values, right? So, very quickly, that's one thing I hope with Christine and I's experience and combined experience, we've been practice administrators. Again, we spend a lot of time up front learning as much as we can about the practice. And there's always kind of this concern that we see repeatedly about,
Hmm.
well, we're going to work every single claim every single time, and we're going to appeal it 3, 4, 5, 6 times just in case there's a chance we may get paid. And listen, that's fine. If that is what is needed, we will map and we will work through, just as, we're real clear that we're moving in and taking care of a very important aspect of the practice. And that's why, again, up front, we want to have some clear, defined protocols on, how do we do appeals, right? How do we do our denials? And make sure everybody's on the same page again about the workflow and develop some of that trust early. There are
Hmm.
some RCM firms out there that believe, after 45 days or after 60 days, the most of the payment's going to come in. We don't need to spend a lot of resources on working that. We don't believe that at Infinix. And so again, the deal is to align with, the medical practice, the client's expectation on truly, what the work effort is across the continuum of the RCM service.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so important because I mean, a lot of just thinking on, y'all have said so much and it's kind of got my wheels turning a little bit, but
Yeah.
also you likely can bring in a certain comfort level that not only are you going to align with their culture, but you also have other clients you're servicing where you have lessons learned that you can apply to this practice. In other words, they may have similar problems across the board, but they're all fragmented and siloed, obviously, because they're different practices. But now you can bring that knowledge, and everyone can have the experience of that knowledge, if you will. So I'd imagine that would be pretty powerful as well with any RCM service, much less Infinix, but especially at Infinix, to your point, Bo, it's just how we take special care in understanding their practice in particular. I don't know if there's any more elaboration on that insight.
Their practice and their local IPAs. There are local health plans that we have to understand, right, and build
Mhm.
relationships with that make both parties successful. And that's
Right,
really important.
right.
I'd say the same thing at the clearinghouse level, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
At
absolutely.
Infinix and in Christine's years over bringing up ERS, we've seen immense behavior differences and behavior changes from the clearinghouses in itself, right? Will help you prep the claim, code the claim, transmit the claim. If it rejects, we're going to fix it. we're still not the clearinghouse, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, the clearinghouse still has to get everything out to the
Right.
payer for the payment cycle to complete. So there's lots of, accountability stops is what I call, right, in our 8 or 9 step cycle. And
Mhm.
so, that's another, I think important piece that the practice needs to understand, that Christine and I and our staff at Infinix are very much involved with how the clearinghouse operates. We can tell you who operates well. We can tell you who's choppy, who has challenges, who's automated, who's still very manual. We
Yeah.
can see it, we can predict it because we're in those spaces all day, every day, 365 days a year. And
Yep.
I just think,
Mhm.
knowing how to do the right things at the right time in the clearinghouse space is another great reason to outsource.
Yep.
Wow. That's
Totally
such an
agree.
excellent point. Yep. And then, that adds also to transparency because y'all know how to circumvent
Mhm.
some of the issues that you've seen before. You understand because you have relationships with, whether it's the payer level, clearinghouse level, offering that transparency. And part of that, to Christine's point, I just want to elaborate a little bit more about how, the platform that we utilize is agnostic to, and,
Mhm.
Bo brought that point up, but, we've had prospects and clients who call us, and that's one of the big problems is it's like, yes, we do have a monthly report that we receive. Maybe they'll have a monthly meeting that's really kind of like, here's the typical KPIs, but here they'll have total transparency anytime they want, in addition to say that monthly meeting that's going to go over, and it's more than just going over KPIs. It's more or less, here are some of the obstacles that we're seeing. Here's some of the things that we're doing to alleviate them. Here's where we need you to help us. Help me help you. It's kind of like a Jerry
Right.
Maguire moment, right?
There you
So,
go.
I
help me
think
help
another
you.
I think another kind of
Um,
modern term, what we shouldn't forget during this discussion today is, we're reading a lot about AI and we're reading a lot about tech and we're reading a lot about optimization. And so in the agnostic kind of model that Infinix provides and that Christine's really taught me and we've been able to deliver all these years on, it doesn't matter what system you're on, is, one of the first things we're going to do is see how you're set up.
mhm,
And
Yeah.
so we've got great relationships with 95% of the major EMRs out there, and having your system optimized. Do you have claims transmission automation turned on? If you do, is that working well? Are there payers that don't deal well with claims, with automatic claims transmission? And if they don't, then do we turn that off? And what does that look like from a resource perspective? So, from a tech perspective, looking at optimization, right?
mhm.
When you do all of that, what does it do? It gives the client more control again.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what I want our potential perspective and our current clients to understand. The more we optimize the system, really the more control it gives them at the end of the day, right? And
Mhm.
Right.
we're just renters at the time, right? We're just there, making sure, taking care of the space and making the claims flow efficiently. The second piece of that is then we're going to bring you our tool, our platform, right? Whether, Stuart, whether it's ARDM or whatever it is we integrate, we're going to give you logins to our platform, and you're going to be able to run a report. We can teach you how to run reports. We can run them for you. We can automate those reports and have them land in your inbox. And whether it's looking at your denials, your AR, what are you doing on your gross and net collection rates? We're going to have that platform ready, educate how to use the Infinix platform. And again, at the end of the day, we want to make sure it feels like you're, flying the plane, but at the same time have a big team around you.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would also say that when people think of outsourcing, they think of, billing the claim. It's
Mhm.
it's typically the billing. But what we're talking here is end-to-end RCM. And even in that, description, the mindset is okay, they're going to help with maybe some coding services, things of that nature, charge entry, actually going through that process. But there's more services involved. I mean, we've got office hour sessions going on rack audits,
Mhm.
right? Physician education for documentation, things of that nature. So there are other things that affect how to improve the process going forward. And I
Yeah.
think that would actually add trust because it just builds that relationship more. And we're just being very thorough in the RCM space rather than just going through the cycle of checking a box and performing task.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And we actually start after the appointment is made, right? We're checking eligibility. We're perhaps getting a referral, maybe pre-authorizing a service, correctly selecting the codes based on the case that's scheduled, communicating the medical necessity of that with the providers and educating them, and then moving forward, right? The case is scheduled, the case has happened. We're coding what actually was what occurred in the operating room. We might be going back to the payer asking for additional CPT codes based on what the physician actually performed in the operating room, and then billing that claim out, following up on that claim, appealing it if necessary, billing the patient. So there's a lot involved there. And yes, you're right. Sometimes there are RAC audits. There have been several RAC audits this year that have to do with different specialties, but it nationwide, and we saw it across the board for all of our clients.
Stuart, before we run short on time, I think another big myth that Christine and I spend a lot of time talking about, both pre-engagement with the client and then post-engagement, and then even further down the road as the medical practice either continues to grow, gets merged or acquired, or et cetera, is what we call repurpose and reallocation. And that is, again, back to kind of the fear factor, right? Like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to outsource. What am I going to do with my team? What's going to happen to my team? Do they want to stay in the practice? Do I want them in the? And then just a lot of people, no matter either, how long you've been doing medical practice management, or if it's nursing, or if it's technical, or, whatever the important role is you're playing in the practice, there is an HR function, right, to outsourcing. And I think that's another place where we can be of service, right? I've had plenty of teams. Christine's had plenty of teams. At Infinix, we have a very team-centric model, and we know how to properly set teams up for success. And what we found a lot of times is you have to write it down. So we literally will help the prospect or the client. Let's write down what everybody does, what their job descriptions are. We'll even grab a resume. Let's get the resume for those 8 or 9 people. Let's look at their background, where they came from, how long they've been with the practice. And just by going through those motions, going through that process, the administrator, he or she will say, oh, you know what? Such and such would be a great fit for this, this role we have over here. Or, we've got a plethora of work to do over at, this side of the practice. I'm going to have him focus over there. And now there's this kind of relief factor that starts to come in after we have the repurpose and reallocation discussion, because sometimes there's a fear that, oh, am I going to have to let all these people go, or how is this going to work? And before we get way down that road, it's very important to go through what everybody does, write it down, look at, where there's skill, where there's need, and we'd love to help you engage in that process.
Nice. Yep. So yeah, it sounds like some good success stories there. Do you have any specific success stories that help them overcome those initial fears and misconceptions that we've been talking about when doing some RCM outsourcing?
One that comes to mind is a client we've had for a couple of years now that we're still very successfully engaged with. And that was as we approached our go live date, and Christine, hop in wherever, there was still a pretty solid backlog of work to do. Hospital charges, office charges, some AR work, right? There had been a tax ID combination. There had been some practice management updates. And then there's all the go forward work.
Yeah.
So I thought Christine did a pretty great job of proposing some solutions where their team was going to continue, although live in the engagement, right? We've our start date has come and gone, but although live in the engagement, their team was going to, if you will, get caught up and work down what they need to work down. And in Infinix, our team was going to take over and work everything on a go forward basis.
Go forward. Yeah. It worked really well.
And I mean, didn't you think, I thought that worked pretty well over a 90-day period, 3.5 months into the engagement, we finally met, and everything was caught up. And I would say there was a very collegial discussion on how we got here. Are things flowing the way they're flowing correctly? And then that client was able to kind of, if you will, execute further on their repurpose and reallocation plan.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I know that we've talked about in RCM and all the services we provide. A lot of misconceptions also like, well, I got to turn everything over, right? It's almost like most RCM, they want everything. That may not necessarily be the case. I think I've heard both of you speak of situations where it could be just working the aged AR, to a certain extent. That's
Absolutely.
all we're going to do because maybe their staff's overrun. They don't have time to get to it. That's just one example. So it's not necessarily all or nothing, right?
Correct. And there's a beauty in being able to pick and choose what your needs are at the time. And so I'll go off your aged AR. There are so many tactics now for the insurance companies to request information and things need to be appealed. They were denied incorrectly. And the staff on hand can barely keep up with the daily work, much less send out medical records, right? Send out appeals, figure out send out invoices for radiopharmaceuticals or, what have you. It's very difficult. And it's very difficult to find staff these days that are really educated on what's going on in this space. It's complicated, right? Very complicated. And we can come in and not only can we address the old AR, but we can help with the new AR. So we can actually stop the claim, to become part of the AR with our help. And we can bring in a lot of people at one time to really attack it and try to get the most out of what's left.
Nice. Yeah. See, I think that's where we're finding that with staffing problems going on out there still, even, a couple of years after COVID, it's still the ripple effects of that. And it's just hard to find good staff
Yeah.
nowadays, but it's just the staff's overwhelmed. So any relief, it's almost like, hey, we're here to give you relief.
Yeah.
So, and while maintaining that control.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, well, that's all the questions that I really have, and we're kind of at the end of this particular session. But I did want to check with some questions. We do have one or two questions here that I'd like to ask. One seems to be that we've already may have answered throughout this process, but it's how can I be sure that an outsourced RCM solution will be tailored to meet the unique needs of my practice and organization?
So I would answer that in two ways. Number one, we'll set up deliverables. So again, before a contract is signed or an engagement is ready, set, go, we'll set up a list, a document of deliverables. And so that way, again, kind of like Christine talked about in the very beginning, that, in a way, the outsource option does give you a higher level of accountability because you have a vendor partner that says, this is what we're going to wake up in the morning and do. We're going to do this all day. Right.
Mhm.
While you, the practice administrator, have 77 different things coming at you. And so I would say, number one, coming up with that list of deliverables and agreeing to that. There's lots of options, through there. Number two is KPIs. When I was an administrator and I was using various vendors for billing, for prior authorization, the one way I could keep straight on if I was receiving good service was, again, looking at the key performance indicators every month and making sure they were in line with what we agreed to in the deliverables. So we can have the deliverable conversation and the key performance indicator conversation and some examples of those long before we sign an engagement, right? And then I would say the third piece of that is, at least the Infinix way, is we're big on customer retention and we're big on customer success. We have whole teams of people that just focus on customer success. And a piece of that is the feedback we get from the customer. So we use a net promoter score index here to grade out and get customer feedback on all of the services we provide. So each quarter, the client's going to get an opportunity to complete our short NPS survey and give us some feedback on what they're seeing. So I would say that triumvirate of the deliverables, the KPIs, and having the two-way communication on performance at the end of the day builds that necessary trust for really a lifetime partnership.
And I think the second question that we have in here, some of that was answered for this, but it's what are the key financial considerations when deciding whether to outsource RCM, and how do you ensure the benefits outweigh the cost? So I think that's speaking to typical ROI.
Well, if we can't come in and do a better job and pay for ourselves, we're going to have a problem. So that's our main goal is not only do we want to cover our costs, but we want to add to that bottom line.
Mhm.
And that's our goal.
I call it the net new value proposition,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Number one, you're looking for net new revenue. Clearly, you already have a team in place, or maybe it's
Mhm.
just 2 or 3 people, depending on what's going on, or maybe it's a vendor you're not so pleased with. And so you see your revenue going up and down, spiking, right? And you'd really probably like to see a more, consistent time series trend line. And so that's something that I talk about a lot is, hey, we're going to, put the right resources in. So we're going to bring you net new revenue as the halfway point through the year comes and then we get to the end of the year. So if you were collecting $1 million a month, 12 million for the year, and we think there's 2 million out there, then we're going to forecast you're going to finish at 14.
Mhm.
And so from that piece of it, there's that $2 million bogey that we're going after. And then you net out what we cost, which, by the way, in most cases is considered sunk cost because you have a team already. And rarely are we more expensive than the team you have in place.
That's
I
right.
don't see that very often. And those are negotiating points
Mhm.
leading up to an agreement. But
Mhm.
again, it's the net new value proposition as to why outsourcing makes sense. And then it's the contingency model if you are signing up for end to end, right? In a
Mhm.
contingency model, we don't get paid unless we collect well. So at
Mhm.
that point, the two parties are very much tied together at the hip.
Nice.
Yeah.
That all makes sense. Well, I don't see any other questions that have come in. So I do want to thank both of you, Christine, Bo, as always. We'll be on again. I think there's going to be a follow-up. So stay tuned for the first of the year, everyone. Tune in for that. So again, appreciate y'all's input as always. Very insightful and very valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
So
you
with that,
very
everyone, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us. Subscribe to get notified when our next episode is online. For more information for how we can help you increase reimbursements at your company, check out our website at infinix.com. That's INFINX.com.